Hey, Radiant Hill family, Bellevue Christian School family, and anybody else who's tuning in for some hope for today. Friends, it is good for us to just take a second and pause in the midst of this craziness and allow ourselves to be tethered to someone, not something, right? Someone outside of our present circumstances. And our only hope is found in Jesus. And that is who I'm tethered to. My hope is that is who you are tethering yourself to. That's where you are finding your true and lasting hope. Let's look to God's word now. Psalm 34:8 says this. And some of you have been around church are familiar with this. Some of you, if this is new to you, this might sound a little weird. But here's what it says. Taste and see that the Lord is good. And what the psalmist is saying here is that the Lord isn't just calling us into mindless obedience where we are just following this list of rules in order to live up to some standard so that we may get into heaven one day. But instead, God has called us into relationship with Him to experience Him, to experience His heart, to experience His mind, to enjoy Him. C.S. Lewis said that in commanding us to glorify Him, God is inviting us to enjoy Him. God has given us beautiful everyday graces in our lives that we can attribute to Him and His goodness, but oftentimes we just miss it, especially when we're locked in a house with our family and we're trying to kind of fight for a surface area and we are starting to maybe get a little bit agitated with each other or stir crazy, or maybe for some of you or your family members are on the front lines and you can't sit still and you're nervous, whether they are in law enforcement or at a hospital, whatever it may be. Maybe for some of you, you know someone who is sick. That's becoming more and more common for all of us. But what I have to say here is that the Lord is still inviting us in to experience Him and His goodness, even in mundane, ordinary places, even in the midst of this craziness. Paul says in Philippians 4:8-9, he says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." And these things in and of themselves, they don't last. They might make us feel good for a minute, but they don't last. But when we allow these good things to roll us up, to glorify our Father in heaven, and to realize that God has His hand in the midst of this craziness, then we begin to see the beauty and our hearts begin to be calmed. Friends, I remember when my oldest daughter, Kaya, was just a little girl and she wasn't sleeping through the night well, and me and my wife were taking shifts on who's going to get up with her now, and she doesn't have to eat. She's just screaming her head off. And I remember going into the room and literally just kind of being out of my mind, like, oh, what is going to make this girl stop crying? And as I grabbed her in my arms, at the height of that, if you've been a parent who's had a crying baby who won't stop, it's stressful, right? But at the height of that moment, I grabbed my little girl in my arms, and she calmed down, and she looks up at me, and then she closes her eyes, and she begins to rest in my arms. And I have this girl in the midst of this stressful, chaotic moment who is a life, who is breathing, who has her whole life in front of her, who has taught me so much, who I love so much. And man, in that stressful moment, I missed the grace that God had for me until He reminded me of it. May the Lord remind us of the graces that we're missing in the midst of our chaos right now. Friends, much love. Talk soon.